Welcome to Nyora Vital. I'm Jay, and I have a special guest here today. Someone that I've learned a lot from, and I'm sure you will too. We're discussing health, the meaning of health, from an anatomical and physiological perspective. So first, I just want to thank you for coming and sharing your decades and decades of knowledge with us. I'm sure my guests will not only be informed afterwards, but they will also be entertained. Can you please introduce yourself and give us a short bio on who you are and your experience?
Well, I am Bill McCafee. Usually the students that I have right now just call me Dr. Mac, and then they kind of refer to me. By way of background, my physiology training has been a master's degree in physiology from the Medical University of South Carolina, which was basically the first 2 years of medical school. At that point, I thought about going into the MD type of thing, and I said, well, no, I wasn't really interested too much in doing the clinical aspect. I was more interested in the educational. So I pursued the PhD part. And in working on the PhD part, back in the old days, PhDs were interested in getting grants and running departments and so forth. And I wasn't interested in the grant aspect of tracing, or chasing money. So I decided I was going to drop out and get into the educational side. And I went to the University of South Carolina and finished a degree in my doctorate in education. Since that time, I've also gotten a master's in library information science, because I see that a lot of times the people in anatomy and physiology and students needed a little help on the, the side of, asking questions. How do I ask questions? Where do I go to look up the information? How to get that information? And one of the big things was, if I want information to solve a problem, am I asking the right question? And that's where I thought the master's in that would help. Basically, as far as my teaching experience, kind of unique. Right after I graduated with my MS, I said, well, what am I going to do now in education? So while I was waiting to get into the doctorate education program, I taught for a year in elementary education. That was an experience teaching 6th and 7th grade science. So people ask me, said, well, how can you teach, your degree down in 6th and 7th grade science? Well, I said, if I can get it down so that I can explain it to somebody in the 6th and 7th grade, I should be able to explain it to those students in the upper levels. So I had some experience teaching elementary school. From there, I've gone into, I'm not going to bore you with a lot of background and stuff, my teaching experience, but I have been involved in education teaching from the elementary level all the way up through the postdoctoral level for doctors. I have been educational administrative officer for a veterinary college. I was research coordinator at an osteopathic college. I spent a lot of time teaching in a community college, anatomy and physiology for any number of health students, plus I was serving as program director in respiratory therapy. So I feel like, and then moving on and teaching for nurses, that's where I kind of learned the real function of, like nurses, what they do and how important they really are. So then from there, I went into teaching I became a educational director for a family practice residency program in a 480 bed teaching hospital. The unique thing was that family medicine was the only residency program there, so the residents had to serve as residents on all the services. So when you were on surgery, you were not a family practice resident, you were a surgery resident. So nobody was teaching you at a sort of you're a lower level, you can't be doing this. After that, then I sort of migrated here to Virginia Beach, where I became faculty member for ECPI, teaching anatomy and physiology for nursing students. Before coming to ECPI, I was with the community hospital for about 20 years. So I figure I've had experience kind of teaching all the way through. One interesting experience that I had in some of my teaching in the community college health program, I taught biology for wastewater plant operators. So that was an interesting experience, how somebody running a wastewater treatment plants, and these individuals needed to know about certain things in anatomy and physiology, microbiology. So that was my job with that. So I think some of my experience has been, academic, teaching, so I feel comfortable. My goal in basically teaching, like the nursing students and everybody, I say, my job is to provide you with the, my basic goal, and it's a purpose in my academic role in teaching anatomy and physiology, is to provide a common background that the students can utilize kind of the understanding of anatomy and physiology in whatever direction their career goal is taking them, just to give them a background. And I always tell students, no matter once you leave the classroom and so forth, my door is not shut. I'm always opening to hearing from students what they're doing, how that I can improve my anatomy and physiology teaching so that they get things that they need to be able to use.
Good. That's a very extensive background for sure. Certainly it's very big shoes to fill. So on behalf of my audience and myself, we have some very big and, as you termed it, thought-provoking questions. So the first of those questions that I'd like to ask is, can you briefly describe the general scope of human anatomy and physiology?
Okay. Well, I'll start in just like I'm teaching the class. Okay, you walk in, you're taking class in anatomy and physiology. Well, what are you taking? Basically, I tell you something, when you ask yourself a question, you got a problem or something, you want some information, one of the first things that you're going to ask yourself is, what am I trying to work with, describe here? And I say, that's like anatomy. Anatomy is taking, a description and putting it together to answer the question of what. Then you ask yourself, now I got the what, how about the why? Why is this working the way that it is, and so forth? And that's where you get into talking about physiology. Physiology is the function of things, the operation. But then the real issue becomes why. And that's where we get into putting together, the anatomy and the physiology. Why are things designed the way they are to function the way that they do? For example, you got muscles in your hand. Okay? You can describe them anatomy, and then you can describe the physiology, how they function. Muscles contract, and to move bones. But the real reason is why. If you think about the hand, the anatomy and the physiology work together to give you such things as you think of gripping. Not every animal has, like the grips, the use of their hands like that. So that's a combination of the anatomy and physiology.
Next question. Define the word health from an anatomical and physiological perspective.
Well, I think it's gone beyond that. Generally, we think of, why the body functions the way that it does. We use the term, kind of the basis for anatomy and physiology is what we call homeostasis. And that is the idea that the body tries to keep itself in a stable internal environment so that I can function, do my functions and everything in a constant environment. Changes to get off of that environment, then my body is going to adjust itself to try to bring it back down to what my normal should be. For example, you start thinking about your temperature. Everybody has the same temperature. That's because the body needs that particular temperature to operate. Same thing as with your heart rate. Everybody has the same heart rate. But when your heart rate changes, your blood pressure change, then your body is going to try to change to bring it back down to something. I sense there's something different. So what do I need to do to get it corrected? Kind of like your thermostat in the room, resetting the temperature. Now, one of the things that started off with, putting this into the perspective of health, generally in the old days, back when I first started, into this, the World Health Organization defined health as the absence of disease. Well, disease was sort of the pathophysiology state when something was off of homeostasis. In other words, if I couldn't bring my homeostasis back down or correct it, then what happened? That became what we referred to as disease. Then we've had an introduction of, things that cause disease from outside the body, pathogens, bacteria, virus, those things. The body still has ways to kind of adjust against those. Now we've seen a big shift in generally the issue of health. As the World Health Organization found it, and I had to go back and look it up. It says if you want it, it is a state of complete well-being. And that complete well-being is in the physical state, the mental state, the social state, and the environmental state, okay? So it's complete well-being, not just the absence of disease. Now, if we look at physical well-being, that's easy for anatomy and physiology, because then you're talking about feeling well. Are you energetic? Capable in your body, of doing the things. Good nutrition, exercise, rest. Those things we can work with, physiologically, anatomically. Then you get into mental and emotional well-being. Well, those are a little bit harder, pinning down. Those are still working in these things. Because if I looked at these, what does that mean? That means experiencing positive emotions, happiness, managing your stress. Managing stress, I can relate back to because we teach about stress in, physiology, anatomy, what's actually causing it down at that level. Another thing is positive outlook. That's something that's kind of hard for anatomy and physiology to put their hands on. One of the things that now relates to it from anatomy and physiology, we teach in, like brain and so forth. There's always referring to your emotional brain, neurotransmitters and things that affect that. Your emotional brain, you're talking about structures within the brain, your limbic system, and how all these different senses are tied together to create. Okay? So that's aligning, that people have that. Social well-being. Here is a tough one. I'm not sure how anatomy and physiology goes with that, rather than, my social being is, do I get along with that person because of how they look or something? But other than that, you talk about your social is, do you have support groups? Do you have, a sense of belonging, a sense of feeling? And if you start putting some of those things together, one of the big problems for elderly and, pushes things along is their sense of belonging, a sense of group, their loneliness. And one of the things that you see kind of with that is if in older age, one spouse dies, then depending upon age, fairly soon after that, what? the other spouse may end up, going through the dying process. Environmental well-being, that's a really hard. I can relate to, environment changes and how it affects the body. But what we're saying is that are you living in a state of a healthy environment? Okay. That means, like gas, water supply. You think of all the things that the body needs. Okay. So those are things that are kind of just beyond moving, we think about, not just being sick. You start thinking about, your mental well-being into things such as, your anxieties, depressions, and that can affect your physical well-being. On a anatomy physiology level, you're talking about, neurotransmitters. I know you hear of different things, mood elevators, and, but what triggers those kinds of things? So, stress, that's another big thing. Well, we can teach in, anatomy and physiology, what is stress as far as in terms of chemically. And when your body experiences stress, then you talking about, hormone changes. And the big one there is the release of cortisol. And we talk about, endocrines and how cortisol affects your body's metabolism. It's a big, sugar metabolism in the body. So you can affect, your body by, stress, but it doesn't affect your body the same. So.
Next big question. Can you give some parameters that mark the thresholds of good and bad health? Like an example from, a system, an anatomical or physiological systems, maybe the nervous system or the cardiovascular system, any example you want to give, like a threshold at which point it marks the beginning of bad health or marks the point where you are still within the boundaries of having good health or homeostasis, as you mentioned earlier.
I think it's a measure, and when you say good health, bad health, it's going to vary from individual to individual. I mean, parameters that are out there. If you're in normal, your normal conditions and so forth. Right now, like good health and looking at things that affect how your body operates. You're talking about like exercise and nutrition and sleep. What's a healthy diet? What's the number of hours of sleep you should get? All of these things are affecting what your body's operation. Does somebody whose diet is off mean, they're not healthy? Who knows? I mean, somebody's not getting the right amount of, in quote, sleep. They're not healthy. It's affecting their state of well-being, but.
Okay, next question. In your opinion, is it true that a human being's achievement of optimum health can only be achieved by dealing with the individual holistically?
Yes.
Good.
That's the one big thing. When we start talking about all these different, well-beings, even if you look around, like at the world situation, you go back and you wonder why certain populations don't get, a certain disease or something. Maybe it's because something in their diet. It used to be back, you think of, like the Eskimos. They were in, really good health as far as some diseases and things. Why? Because they didn't have, the improper, the processed foods and so forth. They ate a lot of liver, which was high in vitamins and these kinds of things. Then you go to some countries that, you worry about people's nutrition, and you look at them, their population is, malnourished. Why? They're not getting the proper foods, okay? So, it's hard to say, individually. It's like things affect people differently. Why is it that you can get a virus in your family, same virus, but yet one person exhibits, this phenomenon. It affects my digestive system. Another one, it's, I've got like a cold, or so everything, I think, and you look at these other things, these other factors for health, it's got to be on an individual basis.
Next big question, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this one. How important is oxygen to the body, and is there a right and wrong way to breathe?
Well, oxygen is one of life's essentials. For humans, you have to have it. And the reason you go back to, cells need oxygen. Okay? One of the reasons the cells kind of evolved and adapted into, you think about individuals. I'm deep in the body. How am I going to get my oxygen? Well, I've got to have a system to get it into the body. I've got to have a circulatory system to get it to me. I have to have in that circulatory system a molecule that's going to carry it to me. Okay? Just like in using that oxygen to make my energy at the cell level, okay, I'm making carbon dioxide on the side. So I got to do what? I got to get rid of this waste. So what do we have? A respiratory system. I think that, systems were evolved to take care of, life functions to keep the cells happy.
Okay. What are the most abundant chemical compounds in the body?
Let me go to this one that's proper breathing.
Gotcha.
I think I neglected that. Okay. Everybody has a normal pattern of breathing, okay, called eupnea. That is your inhalation, exhalation. Yeah. When you start talking about types of breathing, whether it's hyperventilation, breathing fast or breathing slow, there may be, reasons for that. Normally, you want the normal breathing to match, your blood is coming to the lungs to get oxygen. So we talk about a matching of your cardiac output, the blood from your heart to your lungs. That flow is kind of equal to the flow of air coming in so that you can get the gas from your lungs into the blood to be carried to the cells. Now, one of the things in what I call, normal breathing, that it's best to breathe through your nose rather than your mouth. And that is because your nose is responsible for filtering the air coming in. It's also responsible for warming and moistening that air. It's just like if you're sitting there and you're breathing, never notice if you breathe through your mouth, you're breathing real fast, your mouth starts drying out, you start getting a dry mouth. That's not good for you because the air coming in, the body needs to have it warmed and moistened. Now, your other question there, other essentials. Okay? There are things that we call, necessary for life. And probably the other material, one of the materials, is water. Water is essential. Why? Because your body is about 70% water. And you think of all the things going on in your body are sort of chemical equations, things going on. And they operate what? In a water involvement. Okay, so everything in your body, you have what's called intracellular water. That's all the water in the cells. And then everything outside of cells, you're extracellular. But some of that extracellular is in vessels, your blood, your lymph, okay? So now, your body has a water balance, okay? And that means you gotta take in enough water to equal water that you're putting out. It's the main reason. How you gonna take in water? You drink. How you gonna put out water? The bulk of it goes out through your urination. So basically we're looking at, people healthy and something. I'm basically balancing it out. I'm drinking enough to match what I'm putting out. You used to hear the old thing of, you need 8 glasses of water a day. Well, that's kind of changed on individuals depending upon what you're doing and so forth. One of the first things, you talk about, a lot of people hear fatigue. One of the first signs of dehydration is fatigue. Now, as far as other things go your body needs, we've already mentioned oxygen, the water, but if we look at other materials, basically there's an old thing saying, I teach students Chong. What is Chong? Well, they refer to particular elements the body has. One is carbon, the other is hydrogen, oxygen, and then we start talking about proteins, nitrogen. Those are elements that you need in bulk. And those go into making up what we call the body materials. You hear with your nutrients, your carbohydrates, your lipids, your proteins, your nucleic acids, DNA and RNA, all of those are made up of those elements. Okay? So you have elements. Just one other quick thing here that people kind of forget about is that there are a couple of trace elements in the body. And by trace elements, that means your body needs iron. And it also needs iodine. So what do I need iron for? Iron goes into making up your hemoglobin. Iron is the element that carries the oxygen in hemoglobin. That is why, you can become anemic or stuff because you're not getting enough iron in your body. You don't have enough oxygen moving around. Iodine is important. People don't really think about that as much, but iodine is a major component of your thyroid hormone. We think of the thyroid hormones, thyroxine and triiodidine. You hear the terms out there is T3 and T4. Those two hormones coming out of the thyroid gland control your metabolism in your body. So,
next question. Which organ of the body is most important, if I can even ask that question?
well, I'll answer it this way. Organs are made up of what? Tissues. And those types of tissues, the 4 types of the body, connective tissue and nerve tissue and muscle tissue, those are the ones, the basic tissues in the body. Everything is made up of these types of tissue. But what makes up tissue? When cells become specialized, they kind of group together to form the tissues. So if I had to say what's the most important organ in the body, I'd say probably functional cells. And probably, everybody teaches the parts of the cell. Well, it's the cell nucleus and everything that controls what the cell's doing. The most important thing in the body, when you start getting down to cells, is talking about the cell membrane. Why that is important. It's the cell membrane down at the basic level that can control what gets into a cell, what comes out of a cell. So no matter what I want to do, unless I have the materials brought into me or put out of me, then I'm not doing anything. So I would say the basic level of real operation is your cell membrane. Now, let me put that in perspective, just one thing real quick as far as health is concerned. Cystic fibrosis, okay? Everybody thinks of, the big cause there and everything affects different organs and stuff. But if you get down to the basic level of cystic fibrosis, there's a problem making a protein, okay? That protein goes into making channels in the cell wall. The things move in and out. And if I can't get that channel right to move sodium across, then what? what we experience down, what the cells experiencing down here is reflected massively as a big, disorder.
Okay, moving on to the next question. How many systems is the human body composed of? And how does all of the systems of the human body communicate and coordinate?
Okay. We think of, right now, there are 11 body systems, that function together to do all of what we think of. Right now, there's a big emphasis on, I call it, a new system, and that is the gut-brain microbiome and connection. Okay? They are in good communication. Bacteria in the gut and the brain. And it's one of the big, things now to talk about. It's one of the up and coming. But that's almost like a system.
They're in here, but the Anatomically table right here.
So I'd say there are 11 plus these other things that are interacting. Yeah. One of the ways that all these systems are interacting, they're communicating. They're communicating about 3 basic ways. One is they communicate through nerves. Second is they can communicate through hormones. And the third is cells can communicate cell to cell. There are certain chemical messengers and things back and forth, receptors. So cells talk to each other. It's like, you hear things going on, you know what's going on in the neighborhood.
Oh, really? They donated their books to Anatomical, and they actually saw some.
I didn't know whether you were picking up in the background. Good. One thing you might say, the purpose of cells and that interaction and communication is that there are basic reasons that systems communicate and want to communicate. First is, and foremost, the basis of the anatomy and physiology, the homeostasis. So that internal environment is the same for everybody. The second is for coordination, and that is so that they can work together. For example, you get a skin wound or something, and what does it do? The skin signals the immune system to kind of kick that in to help. And then the third is adaptation, and that is, how the body can respond to communicating. How are we going to respond to stress? How are we going to respond to nutritional changes in the environment? Okay, so they're all kind of interrelated in communication. Now, one of the things in that, communication, you start thinking about how we're going to respond. If you start changing one thing you like in the environment, you're going to affect a number of systems that are going to communicate. How are we going to adapt and change to handle being in that environment? Okay? Now, there are a couple things. One is that in your brain, the hypothalamus is measuring a lot of things. We refer to the hypothalamus as the brain's brain. It's kind of like the CEO in measuring things. It's actually chairman of the board, and it tells the CEOs in other departments, what you're doing. And the hypothalamus is actually, we teach in anatomy and physiology, the link between the nervous system and the endocrine system. So that's where they come together in some of that communication. So.
Okay, and the final question is, what advice can you give from a physiological perspective for an individual to stay within good physiological health parameters?
What advice? My advice is to have kind of an understanding of the basic, kinds of level of things, and then to keep up with kind of, the advances and things that are going on coming from, like nutritionists, psychologists, these things, to kind of put them together and to see an interrelationship. And then like the new thing, this thing about the gut-brain connection. And it's new, but they're communicating, not only through nerves and hormones. And so that some of the bacteria in the gut are making, hormones that are going to affect different things, materials that are going to affect things, nerves. The vagus nerve, which goes to like the digestive system, your rest and digest nerve, okay? Well, they can communicate through, neurotransmitters and things between the gut and the brain. One of the things that kind of goes on to form it is there's material produced in the gut that can affect the neurotransmitter, what's going on in the brain. Hormones can affect it. Basically, you think of different areas. You think of, well, it's just one little system doing it. It affects your mental health. For example, in mental health, you can get gut syndromes, nausea, butterflies in your stomach with anxiety, depression, okay? In neurological conditions, actually been shown that in Parkinson's disease, there is a connection between the gut and the brain. And now they're looking at one of the big things, areas of research like autism, communication related gut-brain problems. Then you can think of digestive disorders. They are affected by that connection. So one of the things right now you can think of like stress and anxiety, how that affects your gut and these kinds of things. So the one big question back to, health parameters is to kind of keep abreast of what the normal things are, how they relate to, like the physiology. You look at, changes in what's going on in health changes, like the numbers of hours you should be sleeping, the number of exercise, versus, sitting and so forth. Those change. Things like blood pressure. That's a big thing right now, health-wise. And now how the Heart Association, they change, the different levels of blood pressure, what's acceptable, what's not. For example, you used to think of, everybody used to have, the average of 120/70. Well, now they pushed it up for pre-hypertension, in conditions that are like 180/70. Anything above that now gets into, hypertension. So, monitoring your physiologic parameters. That's the best advice.
Yeah.
Stay healthy.
So, in conclusion of that question, if I understood you correctly, one of the most important things about staying healthy would be to be mindful of your gut health and mindful of the information and research that's coming out on the gut-brain communication system. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and be mindful of other things that are going to affect your health. When you talk about your social, well-being, some of the things that you may be doing there are affecting, down inside the operations and so forth physiologically. But unless you're aware of it, and focusing thing on it. The big thing now, you need to be joyful.
Yeah.
Don't worry about everybody else, and then think about, me.
That's right. I want to thank you, Dr. Mack, for all you've done for me prior to this date, all I've learned from you, and I want to thank you for having this conversation with me today. I'm sure my audience will be well informed post watching this video, and I just want to wish you well on the rest of your journey, and we'll meet again.
Yep.